Well, welcome back to GASWorks. We are a guild of artistic sorts, and we are the multimedia arts and entertainment on the North Shore, particularly here in Salem. And we're bringing you the best of what's happening and the most interesting, certainly, of what's happening here in Salem. So welcome back.
Welcome to episode 6, where today our theme is a little out of the ordinary. We're going to be talking about Danvers State Hospital, just a few miles from here. And we've got two very, very interesting men, both of whom are artists, among other things, to tell us about it, tell us how they draw inspiration from it. First off, we have graphic artist Michael Ramsuer, who captures Danvers State chiefly as an illustrator, but he's also an author, a publisher, and an historian. And he was a psychiatric social worker and a psychotherapist, I believe.
Correct.
In the mental health system for 25 years. Then we have preservationist John Archer, who is known chiefly for the Archer Mansion in Danvers, which incorporates pieces of Danvers State that he rescued when it was being demolished. And you may have read about him in the New York Times. There was an article this April called "Scrap Mansion," I believe, was the way they put it. Which is an incredible way to describe this magnificent house. I don't believe that does it justice. Yeah. Gentlemen, I want to ask first, it seems to me that there's a great romance with sort of tragedies in American history. There is the witch trials, the Civil War, the Titanic, the Lincoln assassination, and I'd say the Danvers State story is one of them, an increasingly a well-known one. What is the romance, you think?
I think, personally, I think a part of it is just the passage that took place with the hospital from its inception in 1878 after 4 years of construction, where it was birthed, if you will, into the world as a place to really help people with emotional and cognitive problems. And there's a lot of care given there, and it was a very humanitarian environment, which slowly devolved into a pretty horrible scene by the time you get into the early to mid 20th century. So I think there's a tragic aspect there that speaks to the nature of human.
Something that was quite beautiful and meant to be healing for people. I was surprised by the pictures of the early pictures of it, the labyrinths and things like that, that were just, and the quality of life for the early patients there. Can you describe
Well, Dr.
that?
Thomas Kirkbride was the psychiatrist in the 19th century that designed the building, and his theories really swept the country. Mm-hmm. And the history of psychiatry is what we talk about at Danvers State Hospital. The history of psychiatry in this country, a lot of it really happened first up there. Cold water immersions, electroshock therapies, lobotomies. And they were all done with the idea of helping patients. A lot of people think back on Danvers State Hospital as a horrible place where they tortured the patients, and that's just not true. Mm-hmm. It happened in our time, unfortunately, with overcrowding, underfunding, understaffing, eroded Dr. Thomas Kirkbride's 19th century efforts. But it achieved great success, and that's what we're here to celebrate, the great success stories that did happen at Danvers State Hospital. It was the most expensive building ever built in Massachusetts up to the 1870s. It was always considered the castle on the hill. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people had a problem with that, even back in the 1870s when it was built, that they were putting so much money into a building that was housing mentally challenged people. They were called lunatics at that time. And, but Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride's theory was everyone had to get up and go to work and take pride and where they lived. Again, it was the most expensive building money could buy.
So the work therapy that people had to use.
That was very important,
Yeah.
especially in the beginning, and it was seen as therapeutic, which it really is, because when we work, we gain a sort of sense of self-esteem and identity. I hear what you're saying, John. I think where I might disagree a little bit with you is in terms of the rapidity of the decline that happened. Dorothea Dix noted that the humanitarian nature of the inception of a place like Danvers, because of overcrowding, because of diminished funding and so forth, did very rapidly go downhill. And the doctors who ran the hospitals became very demoralized after a while.
How rapidly would you say that period of time was?
By the beginning of the 20th century,
Okay.
there was already a
30-year
sense of
period.
a dream gone awry.
But it was really the introduction of the drug therapy in the 1950s that really, I think, added a great deal. Now you didn't have to get up and get dressed and go to work. You could just take this pill and vegetate for the rest of the day.
That's very true,
That-
especially
yeah.
later on.
Yeah.
But Kirkbride he was a very idealistic person and saw an 80% cure rate, which in terms of mental illness is probably unrealistic.
Now, we talked last night a little bit about the type of person that actually wound up there that really didn't need to be there at some point, as happened with many hospitals throughout the country at a period of time.
The pendulum at that point, and you're very right, Sarah, but the pendulum at that point was towards long hospitalizations where patients did not have any rights, so to speak. So you would have women incarcerated there by their husbands who worked in cahoots basically with a doctor. You had there was a story of a boy hospitalized there for picking up the skirts of girls in the playground. You had people hospitalized there because they didn't speak English. An example in the annual reports are Turkish guys who were put there and brought up from Bridgewater. There was an intern.
Because they thought that they were schizophrenic or something. They were actually
Speaking
just speaking
gibberish?
another
Yeah, they were
language.
speaking. They just didn't speak the language, and they were acting. They were probably totally disenfranchised. Looking like homeless type of presentation and so forth. But there was a intern there, for instance, who ran into a woman who had been hospitalized there in her teens for a bad case of acne. And she was
Bad case of acne.
a bad case of acne, and she was still there when she was 70.
Wow. Can you tell us about your would you call them a painting or an illustration? The sensitive ones. I was just struck by where the name came from.
The sensitive ones, I think this is the one that we've got hanging up in our home, that I took from, that I drew from a book by Albert Deutsch called Shame of the States. And Deutsch was not talking about Danvers, he was talking about primarily a hospital down in Philadelphia called Byberry that he likened into a hellhole. And he compared it actually to the Germans, the death camps and so forth. But what I did in reading about Deutsch's expose of Byberry was I extrapolated the numbers, patients versus staff ratios and stuff, and the same thing was going on at Danvers and all the other places. I mean, that's why they were called snake pits. So again, it's contrasting, the humanitarian ideal of the place with what it eventually became. It's really quite stark.
Maybe, Michael, you can walk us through.
Yeah.
I think you've caught the hopelessness in your art so wonderfully,
But
and yet we haven't.
memorializing, and honoring exactly what you say is these people who weren't even worthy of having a plaque or the lost
Right.
dream. What I see about what you've both done in your own ways is memorialized and tried to revive it in your own ways, you know. So if you could
No,
speak a little bit
yeah,
about...
I'll just briefly talk, you know, in terms of the drawings that I did, I was interested in mills for a long time, and I was selling drawings of mills in a gallery back in Andover, and then I started working in a group home in Haverhill. It's called the Danvers Exit House. 6 institutionalized women transitioning back into the community. And I took one of them back to the hospital during a transitional visit, and I saw Danvers for the first time. And this was in 1986. I was just totally blown away by the place, and had never seen an asylum up close. And it was like an epiphany for me, and that's when I got hooked on Danvers. And basically,
what were some of the words you could use to describe that moment? And you said blown away.
Okay, well, bear with me for a second here.
Okay.
You have to remember the building, the Kirkbride building was a quarter of a mile long. So it was...
That's just one aspect of
that-
this vast...
Yeah, well,
huge-
there were 35 other support buildings up there. And when Avalon Bay got the contract to put up approximately 600 apartments, they tore all 34 buildings down except the Kirkbride, and they tore 2/3 of the Kirkbride down, which houses now approximately 60
So
apartments.
this is what we talked about.
We should say
earlier, the
Avalon
Kirkbride.
Bay is a developer that turned part of the
Yes.
Kirkbride building into
Yeah,
condominiums.
and there were large, large throughout the whole country, builder of condos and apartments, and they don't do reconstruction. They don't do what they did here, and they did save 1/3 of the building. We call it the central core or the jewel, but they tore all the rest of the building down, and they didn't. You know, it's not what they do. They build new construction.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they tore this magnificent structure
Yeah.
down, and a lot of people didn't see the beauty in it. I happen to find it tremendously beautiful.
So I want to talk about the preservation part or the attempt at that, but I would also love to hear what was it that, because I think it really informs what we see in your art.
I'll just read a few lines. This is from my book, The Eye of Danvers II. I first encountered Danvers State Hospital on a hot and sultry evening in the summer of 1986. As a part of my job as residential counselor in the Haverhill, Massachusetts group home, I was driving a van returning a resident who had been out on a pass. The sun had not yet set, and the main hospital building, which had been shut down for 4 years, cast its dark shadow across the curving brick driveways and the burned grass campus. While another staff person brought the client into a relatively new building that now served as a state hospital, I sat in the van staring at the castle, a massive red and maroon presence in the fading light, the blue sockets of its turret windows catching a flicker of reflected sun. Gothic arches were etched repeatedly and, in retrospect, compulsively into the warp and woof of the building's design. I could imagine a sound, a bizarre musical tone, a humming, emanating from the strange 19th century asylum. It created a sensation of displaced time. I was witness to an atavistic form existing within my own era as being presented with an ancient mystery. As I sat transfixed by the strange scene before me, a man suddenly appeared at the car's passenger window, his voice beseeching as he asked, "I'm not going to die, am I?" He repeated the question several times, his face contorted with despair and what I would characterize as an existential angst, although this could well have been my own anxiety projected onto him. "I'm not going to die, am I?" was the crucial question. 26 years after the patient asked that question, it still resonates, reverberates. I lied to him, of course, telling him no, he wasn't going to die, and apparently that was good enough for him because then he wandered off. But his question haunts me now more than ever. And I ended up working with this guy 3 or 4 times in the acute, one of the acute units I worked on, and he was in a group home. A really nice guy. a great guy. So
The thing that drew me in long before I met you to your work, you talk about the sockets, the windows being sockets. They
Yeah.
do. If they feel like eyes.
Yeah.
You feel like even if the window is empty, and occasionally in your artwork there's a person behind the window,
yeah,
you feel the people inside looking out, and you feel the humming that you described.
right.
You
And it's
know.
almost to me like the building has absorbed all the memories that it has of the history of,
It has a
of
human
all these
form.
souls
Yeah.
in there.
This human form to
what,
your-
what the walls have been witness to is beyond description, I
Yeah.
think.
Can you
Both
walk
good
us
and bad.
through a few of your illustrations?
Sure. The illustrations, the first three illustrations are pastels that I did probably from the late 80s up into recently 2010. And they were a major mechanism that I had for managing my own affect working in the field. And Danvers, I think I projected onto Danvers too from 3 years that I spent rather unhappily at a prep school in Pennsylvania when I was younger. And it was a Gothic. Danvers was domestic Gothic. That school was Gothic. It was a different category of Gothic. But there was just there's something about Danvers that just drew me in and almost consumed me. And I'm no longer doing the buildings. Of course, the building is gone, and it's a great, great loss. I can't even begin to put into words, how great a loss it is to look up there and see the cookie cutter condominiums. But I've started doing crows and
But the crows, is that the buildings behind it?
Yeah.
So it's still in a way.
Yeah, it's still in a way. It's just got for me a different intensity. I'm not. I'm retired from the mental health system now as of this summer, and I'm not, when I was doing just Danvers itself, I was just getting stuff out, and it was a major form of therapy for me. But I know, Dan, when we started this show tonight, that you handed me some pictures of patient art, and I did run some art therapy groups on the units when I worked there, but I'm not an art therapist per se, but I was very interested in art as it related to madness. And I was very interested for quite a while in outsider art, which these are probably good examples of, but I knew an artist, and I worked with him a number of times. As a matter of fact, I worked with his family too, who did some of the murals up at Danvers State. And he was immensely talented, and he was a very intelligent man, very articulate. And he had a story when he was younger. He came from a family of like 23, I think. And he was incarcerated out in the western part of the state. And he, with what he called were nonverbal patients on the bottom floor. And he and his best friend, his only friend, they were the only ones who could speak to each other. And they went out one day, and the patient lost sight of his friend, and so he went around the building and he found the 10-year-old kid hanging from a tree. And so he then had to spend the next 4 or 5 years in a situation with people he couldn't speak with, incarcerated in this asylum. And he ended up at Danvers and did these murals.
So it's the only way of communicating.
Yeah, the art was very important to him. And then I'll be quiet for a second. See, one of the contrasts with Danvers is you have the problem of no patient rights and people being put up there for a good part of their lifetimes. But when I look at this guy who had a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, I worked with him in a hospital where he came in. This was relatively recently. He came in, he was living under a bridge in Lawrence, drinking a fifth of vodka a day. and the insurance company brought him in on what's called a 24-hour observation bed, and they wanted him out right away. So it's kind of like the pendulum, to give perspective, has shifted back to now people are in and out of hospitals so fast. And they are in, and they are heavily medicated often, and they're put through some groups, but it's a lot different than the commitment that John and I share, in terms of what happened at Danvers.
Yeah. I do want to make sure that we have time to cover everything, and I want to talk about these crows, but if we would, I was doing a little research on the symbolism of crows last night, and there's a connection I see in here with what you've done. And so if maybe we could come back to the crows and we'll end at the end of the show once we've talked some more. Can you talk about the efforts to preserve and then what came to be your work of art, which is the home that you have built?
Well, my home had nothing to do with my initial reasons being up there or being interested. I was on the Preservation Commission in Danvers, and we had a very active, wonderful Preservation Commission. It came to our purview for a demolition permit for this magnificent edifice. And naturally, we said no in many ways and tried different ways to try to get people behind us. The town manager, the state, Bill Galvin was really in charge of the keys of Danvers State Hospital. And he had never been up there. And so there was a lot of bad things that happened. A lot of people just thought it should be torn down. They didn't know why. They didn't realize the beauty of it. And some of them had very little education about Danvers State and what it meant to not just Danvers, the community, but to to the history of psychiatry in this country. And that alone is interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's fascinating.
I just got the signal. We have 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that we can move through, if you can walk us through what you've been able to restore and really what the life is of what remains of...
Well, what happens up there, Avalon Bay saved a third of the building. And that houses approximately 60 apartments, and people that live there love it. It's sort of a misinformation to say they saved a third of it. They saved a third of the facade, the front of the building.
Okay.
It's a brand new building inside. It does have the roof line and where the windows were. So it looks pretty much the same as you drive up. And people go up there now and say, oh my God, this is so big. I can't believe this. And you go, you have no idea what this building was like. But it was a very sad thing. And we worked really hard and through our efforts, my efforts and my commission's efforts, we were able to save and convince Avalon Bay to save a third. We were asking for more, but hoping if we could get this, at least it would give us an idea of what that building happened. If you're a real purist, like Richard Trask, a town archivist in Danvers, it's like, just cutting the head off of an animal and putting it up on a block. Taxidermy. But it's, we were able to save a third of it, and I'm very proud of what we did. And Avalon Bay did a great job of what they did. Unfortunately, it got redeveloped. And, but I was able to get pieces from my for my own use. As the building was being torn down, we had a group of people called the Urban Explorers that would go up there and take pieces and that were going to be destroyed anyway, and often they would bring them to me because I had to maintain a big presence in the newspaper about this building. And so I got pieces of it, but I had to buy, I knew the people that got the salvage rights, Northeast Construction or Deconstruction, and I bought the front doors and a cupola and a whole bunch of things.
So the front door has a little history. I had heard that it was in a music video at one point in time when it was still...
Well, a number of films were made up there, Sessions 9 being probably the most well-known sort of horror film up there, which is a pretty good horror film, actually.
So that you have the door in
Yes,
your
well, we
home.
have there was another movie up there with Gene Simmons, the actress Gene Simmons, in I think 1954.
Right.
And I own the film, and I have her walking through my front doors.
Ephraim Zimbalist was in there
Zimbalist
too.
was in there. Yeah, and it's just about like what you just said. The story is about a psychiatrist, and he falls in love with his secretary, and he wants his wife committed. And the fellow just says, I want to have you committed. And he has her committed up at Danvers State Hospital. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with her, so I think you brought that up.
Yeah,
but
So you
happened.
have more or less, you've got what's called the Danvers room in your household, and I'm holding here a piece of it, an architectural drawing of, and we have a photo of you standing in front of us. Tell us about the Danvers room.
Well, I built this room, a large room, around the cupola and the front doors and the newel post and a whole bunch of other doors, and I was able to make it work. I like architectural features, and there were some great features, so I worked with an architect, and we put it together for a room. And I hope the room will become, I have a lot of pieces also from Danvers State, and some things that probably I shouldn't have, but I do have them, records, and they're very interesting, and really movie scripts, some of those.
Well, we also saw Michael's art in your home. We were there for an event that I want to point out that this addition to your home serves nonprofits, and so what appeals to me about it is that you've taken something that had developed this dark history around it, and then you're just breathing new life into it. The keyboard from the organ inside the cupola, and just the incredible beauty of the structure that you've built with parts of something that was being discarded, like the people that were being discarded.
Well,
in
it's
this
true.
world.
We're a throw-out society. We tore that building down as we put people away, and I think this is to celebrate the if we can say, the joy of that building, what Thomas Kirkbright's sort of early vision, and his vision was really quite tremendous. It really was.
And the work, the connection that I had made to the crows last night, I was looking up symbolism of crows in Native American art, and you had even said this earlier, bringer of light. You had used that term. There are, in Native American art, a crow or a raven is the bringer of light into something, into darkness. So important to know our history in every, in particular incidents like this, so we can grow from
But
it.
it's also wonderful that we've got folks who interpret it for us. I feel like it's better to, I know more from being in John's magnificent home and also from Michael's magnificent art. Unfortunately, I could go on for an hour, but we can't.
But,
So
but
alas.
we will make sure to connect our audience with places to buy Michael's books. He's got quite a few that have been inspired by his work at Danvers, and to the fabulous article that was written about your home in all its grandeur at the New York Times, and also to keep up with whatever else that you're doing, new shows that are opening at your performances as a musician as well as an actor. We will keep everybody in touch with what you have
Thank you
going on.
very much,
Gentlemen,
for having me on the show.
thank you so much for some really fascinating tales and fascinating art. And folks, we'll see you on episode 7.
Good.